In recent days, the world of cinema and millions of fans have yet to recover from the grief of losing the great legend Robert Redford, an immortal monument to Hollywood, when he closed the extraordinary journey of his life at the age of 89. What has just happened to Robert Redford is not merely a sad chapter in a tragic life. It is an earthquake, a ruthless slash into the heart of humanity, leaving millions breathless in pain. And now, as his body is being prepared for a private funeral in the mountains of Utah, with no red carpet, no cameras, only family gathered in quiet remembrance, the world watches from afar. Hollywood mourns. Tributes pour in from all corners. But among them, one voice rises above the rest. It is Meryl Streep, the co-star, the confidant, the companion of 40 years, who stunned the entire world with a farewell so piercing, so heartbreaking that it could shatter the heart of anyone who heard it and drowned that moment in tears. Before we begin this journey, press the like button as a gesture of respect, a simple tribute to the legend who gave everything to the world and who has now been cruelly taken from us by time. As the world mourns Robert Redford's passing, it is worth remembering that this golden icon of Hollywood began not in triumph, but in trial. He lay trapped in a narrow bed, his body paralyzed by polio, and his young spirit dragged into shadows. No audience would ever see shadows pressing like a silent verdict, as if fate were already testing how much pain a legend's heart could bear. Born on August 18, 1936, in Santa Monica to Charles and Martha, and raised as an only child in Venice, while the Depression's weight still lingered, he learned too early how fragile life could be. He would later recall of those years. I thought I might never walk again, but my mother refused to let me give up. Night after night, Martha massaged his stiffened legs, whispering courage into silence, teaching him that resilience was not a shout of victory, but the quiet refusal to surrender. By the late 1940s and early 1950s, the boy who would one day command the screen first had to master fear. Restless and angry, he drifted into the orbit of a rough Los Angeles crowd, slipping into reckless nights that carried more danger than he grasped. Years later, he confessed, "I was always searching for something I couldn't name." One night, police stopped him for mischief. It ended with only a warning, but the memory stayed. His father's stern guidance pulled him back from an edge that might have ended him too soon. He steadied himself with sketchbooks, the open sky, and the rhythm of sport. With a racket, he even warmed up tennis legend Poncho Gonzalez at the Los Angeles Tennis Club, a fleeting spark, hinting he might belong somewhere beyond the forgotten corners of his restless city. But in 1955, at just 18, came the blow that would eclipse every triumph to follow. His mother, Martha, the same woman who had once massaged life back into his paralyzed legs, entered surgery and never returned. What began as hope ended in infection, and with it, the light of his world went dark. For the son she left behind, the loss was absolute, a rupture deeper than illness ever carved. His father never remarried, and the house became hollow, every room echoing with the absence of her voice. Redford would later admit, "It left me with a silence I could never fill." That silence shadowed him into adulthood, into fame, into triumphs that should have tasted like victory, but instead carried the ache of a wound no success could heal. The mid-1950s carved extremes that cut like blades. A sports scholarship at the University of Colorado briefly lifted him, but heavy drinking soon stripped it away. The shame of leaving too early weighed on him like stone, as if the world had slammed the door before he had learned to open it. At the brink of despair, he chose exile over surrender. In his early 20s, he wandered France, Spain, and Italy, living on scraps, sketching, painting, and walking endless miles under foreign skies until the inner noise softened. Looking back, he admitted, resilience is rarely loud. It is moving forward anyway when fear has every argument in its favor. When he returned to New York in his mid-20s, he carried scars and tools, a stubborn belief in art, discipline forged on courts and trails, and a vow born in silence that when shadows came again, he would not surrender, but meet them with work. This crucible became the foundation of the man we mourn today, not a myth smoothed by legend, but a childhood carved by disease, a heart rearranged by grief, near failures that almost ended him, and an awakening earned only through exile, struggle, and the lonely determination to begin again. To the world, Robert Redford's arrival in New York in the late 1950s looked like ambition. But beneath the flickering neon was a young man already marked by scars of illness, grief, and humiliation. At 22, still carrying the raw wound of his mother's death and the shame of a lost scholarship, he walked those wet streets not with the certainty of youth, but with the heavy burden of survival. At Pratt, he clutched brushes as if painting could rescue him, then dared himself to face the stage of the American Academy of Dramatic Arts. Acting was no miracle, only a brutal climb. By 24, he scraped by with meager TV parts, The Twilight Zone, Maverick, Perry Mason, roles that barely kept him afloat. Later, he admitted it wasn't glamorous. It was survival, plain and simple. And survival came with irony. The very face that would one day command Hollywood was his earliest cares. Directors dismissed him as too pretty, a gilded cage he would later describe bitterly. You're inside, but no one thinks you belong. He fought not to be seen as a mask, but as a man. Then in 1963, freedom arrived on Broadway in Neil Simon's Barefoot in the Park. At 27, he finally revealed the wit, timing, and quiet vulnerability critics could not ignore. Night after night, the applause was more than noise, it was vindication. For the first time, they saw me, not just what I looked like, he reflected years later. From that stage, Hollywood beckoned. Small parts gave way to leading roles, and soon the boy once dismissed was carving himself into cinema's memory. Yet the sting of those rejections never left him. Instead, it became the hidden fire behind every choice, the reason he later seized control as a director, the seed of Sundance itself. Looking back now, as we mourn him, the irony is almost cruel. The man who gave independent voices to the world had once been silenced by the simplest judgment that beauty was all he had. From dim television sets to Broadway's burning light, Redford proved himself not a hollow idol, but an artist who clawed for every inch. What began as survival became the spark of a meteoric rise. And what the world now remembers as legend was born first in shadows, silence, and pain. Robert Redford's rise to Hollywood's summit gleamed with golden brilliance. Yet beneath the dazzle lived wounds unseen by the roaring crowds, private battles carved into the very marrow of his fame. Through the late 1960s and 1970s, he looked untouchable. One of the world's most bankable stars, immortalized as the Sundance Kid in Butch Cassidy in the Sundance Kid, the sly Johnny Hooker in The Sting, the relentless Bob Woodward in All the President's Men, and the tender lover in The Way We Were. These roles alone could have sealed his immortality. Yet each ovation carried chains of beauty and expectation, tightening invisibly around him. He confessed that the very face millions adored was never pure blessing but a curse. Casting directors dismissed him as too pretty, and even at his height, he felt the sting of suspicion. Was he truly more than golden hair and symmetry? He once recalled. It was a gilded cage. You're inside, but no one thinks you belong, he later said, bitterness lacing the voice of a man forever fighting to be seen as more than a mask. Even triumph demanded proof, forcing him to claw again and again against the doubt that trailed him like a shadow. When The Great Gatsby faltered despite his presence, the wound cut deeper than reviews could measure. To the public, it was a stumble. To him, it was a brutal verdict that a golden boy was never allowed to falter. Yet he refused retreat. Instead, he chose harder roads, pouring himself into All the President's Men, where film bowed not to escapism but to urgency, where entertainment yielded to truth. The cost was heavy. Critics accused him of being self-serious. Audiences drifted, but he stood unbent. Cinema has a duty to mirror reality, however uncomfortable, he declared, and he carried that conviction like a soldier bearing unseen scars. Then came his greatest crucible, stepping behind the camera for ordinary people. Whispers in Hollywood mocked the idea that a handsome leading man could ever command vision. Each day felt like walking a tightrope, eyes waiting for him to fail. Yet what emerged was triumph, a piercing meditation on grief that shattered silence and won him the Academy Award for Best Director. For Redford, that Oscar was not just recognition but vindication, the long-delayed release from suspicion, the proof that he was more than an idol, but a storyteller of rare depth. Still, hunger drove him further. In 1981, he planted Sundance, a fragile dream ridiculed by skeptics, gasping for funds, sustained only by his faith and sacrifice. Nights came when collapse seemed inevitable, yet he carried it forward, not for himself, but for those unheard, to build the stage he once longed for. He gave up peace, fortune, even companionship, enduring the solitude of a man who refused easy comfort so that others could step into light. Thus, Redford's golden age was never pure shine. It was brilliance edged with pain, the prison of beauty, the crushing weight of expectation, the exhaustion of proving himself endlessly, and the lonely burden of nurturing a fragile dream into a sanctuary. The world saw triumph. He lived struggle. And in that struggle, his legend was born, not as a man who basked in stardom, but as one who turned scars into legacy. Now, in mourning, the truth resounds with searing clarity. The world remembers a star, but what endures is the artist who showed that even at the summit, the climb bleeds with pain, and that greatness is never born from ease, but from fire. It is heartbreaking to realize that even legends, no matter how brilliant or towering their careers, cannot outrun the cruel finality of time. On September 16, 2025, when news broke that Robert Redford had died at the age of 89, the world staggered as if the ground itself had cracked. There had been no warnings, no hospital vigils, no whispered farewells. Only days before, he had spoken of Sundance, of scripts still unfinished, of stories he swore would one day find their way to the screen. One moment Robert Redford seemed immortal, a monument of Hollywood, unyielding, eternal. The next, there was silence, cold and merciless. For millions, grief was instant, visceral. But for Meryl Streep, the shock was like a blade to the heart. "I think I'm still in denial," she whispered, her voice trembling in the hours after. She was in a makeup chair when she overheard the words that shattered her world. "Robert Redford is gone." To strangers, it was a headline. To her, it was the collapse of 40 years of trust, of companionship, of a friendship that had steadied her through the storms of life. "It feels," she wept, "like the air has gone out of the room." Their story began in 1985 under the vast skies of Out of Africa. On screen, they gave the world one of cinema's most unforgettable romances, her Baroness, his hunter, two souls bound by tenderness against the endless African horizon. But what grew off-screen was rarer still. Not scandal, not fleeting passion, but something deeper, trust. In the silences between takes, in the way he looked at her without judgment, in the way he listened, Meryl found an ally who never demanded, never diminished. "Robert always made me feel seen," she said. "And in this industry, that is almost a miracle." The river scene, that indelible hair-washing moment etched into film history, became more than performance. At first, it was awkward, his hands unsure, the intimacy stilted. But then, by the fifth take, something changed. His touch softened, his gaze lowered its guard. Her surrender became real. What the camera captured was not acting, but truth. A man stripped of his armor, a woman responding not to a role but to the rare gift of authenticity. "I was so in love," she later confessed, "not in romance but in awe of his humanity." That moment, immortalized in celluloid, was a window into Robert Redford as only a few ever knew him. Vulnerable, tender, devastatingly real. The decades that followed only deepened their connection. They did not need constant calls or endless appearances together. Theirs was a quieter thread, woven into the fabric of each other's lives. When Streep spoke of him, her voice softened, reverent. When he spoke of her, it was with a respect untouched by vanity. In a world where partnerships often collapse under ego, theirs endured, simple, steadfast, unshakable. So when the world mourned, it was her voice that pierced the flood of tributes. Standing among mourners, her own voice breaking. She said, "One of the lions has left us." Robert was not just a star. He was a compass showing us what it meant to carry beauty with integrity, fame with humility, grief with grace. I loved him. I admired him, and I will never stop missing him. Her words fell like thunder across the silence of loss. This was not Meryl Streep, the icon. This was Meryl, the friend, stripped bare by sorrow, mourning a man who had made her feel human when the world demanded she be untouchable. In Utah, his funeral unfolded as he had wished. No cameras, no spectacle, no glittering Hollywood circus. Just family, just silence, just love. Yet through her tears, the world was drawn into that quiet mountain air. Meryl's grief became our grief, her trembling voice the vessel for millions who could not find their own words. And perhaps that was the final gift Robert Redford gave. Not the roles, not the awards, not even Sundance itself, but the truth that beneath legend lies a man scarred yet enduring, fragile yet resilient, who changed the lives of those who truly knew him. Through Meryl Streep's heartbreak, he lived again, not as myth, but as the human being who had left an indelible scar on her heart and on ours forever.